Friends, how's it going? How are you all doing? I hope I find you all well. Since you're listening and watching, I assume that you're doing well. Wonderful. We have Cynthia here with us today, and another one of those connections that I love, with the satellite. Cynthia, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so can you tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, I'm married. Been married 29 years. I have 3 children, 1 grandchild.
Tell us a little about your childhood, your family. Tell us a little.
I lived in a family with 6 children. I was the second oldest. We moved around a lot. No, my father was not in the military. I was raised basically Presbyterian, but we didn't consistently go to church. My father was Southern Baptist, so I wasn't baptized until I was 14 years old.
Okay, but how did you practice your Presbyterian faith? Your dad was... he was a Baptist?
Well, he was Southern Baptist, and they're pretty strict in the South. And as we moved north, there were less Southern Baptists. It was Northern Baptists, and he could see the hypocrisy of it all. So he really, I would say, lost interest in going to church. And we started going periodically to the Presbyterian Church, because he knew that God was important and learning about Him was important, so he wanted his children to learn about God, but he wasn't interested in going to church.
Did you always believe in God?
I believe so. I didn't know Him very well, but I think I always believed.
And if you were raised as a Presbyterian or Baptist, how did you end up becoming Catholic?
As an adult, when we got married, we decided to be Presbyterian. My husband was Methodist. And I can't say that I was a very good Presbyterian. My husband was a very good Presbyterian. And I would say I wasn't a good Presbyterian because there wasn't enough truth there to hold me. And when our family moved to Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, when I was 32, I had a friend, was speaking with a friend from Chicago, and she told me I should read this book about Our Lady appearing in Texas. And it was the first time I'd ever really felt interiorly moved to do something. So I went to the bookstore. I didn't know there were Catholic bookstores then. But I went to the bookstore, and I didn't find the book she was speaking of, but I found a book on Medjugorje. So I bought it and read it. It was very Catholic, but the Catholicism was over my head. And what I got out of the book was, if the Mother of God wants us to do certain things, shouldn't we do it? So I started investigating the Catholic Church.
Before becoming Catholic, what did you think about the Catholic Church?
I really didn't have a view of the Catholic Church. It was just another church like a Presbyterian or a Methodist or a Baptist. I didn't know. It was unique.
Okay, so did you know anything about what Catholics believe?
Not really. I know they did a lot of standing, sitting, and kneeling. And I knew there were a lot of rules, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. I worked with a lot of Catholics, and I would ask them questions, and nobody could ever answer them in a way that would ever entice me to learn about them.
So what was it that made you buy that book that your friend talked to you about? Was it the apparitions or just curiosity? Was it another kind of...
I felt interiorly that I needed to go get that book. So I went and got a book. It wasn't the same, but I got a book and I read it. And I tend to be a bit on the intense side. So once I start something, I continue at a rapid pace, I would say. And after I read the book and was curious, because Our Lady had these specific things we should do, I went over to the Catholic Church and I walked around it and I touched the tabernacle and I said, I wonder what this is. And I went in the back of the church and there was a pamphlet on the rosary and I said, oh, that's on the list. So I picked it up and went home and after I put my children to bed, I prayed my first decade of the rosary.
That's incredible. Did everyone at home know what was going on inside of you?
No, nobody knew. I mean, I read the book in January, and I joined the church in April. So it was a very short period of time. And we had just moved to Jacksonville, so I met someone who had just converted. And when I got to her house, and I saw all the statues and everything, I had someone to ask questions of. And by then I had found a Catholic bookstore, so I decided that I wanted to learn more, and that I wanted to, so she explained to me that I had to take a class, and I said, well, I would do it. And she said, well, before you can do that, you need to understand that we believe certain things, which I had no idea about the Eucharist. And she told me, that was my introduction to the Eucharist. She said, you have to believe that that piece of bread is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. And I'm like, what? It just seemed so bizarre to me. It was the first time I'd ever heard that. And I told her I'd have to think about that, but I was still gonna check into the class. And I went over to the Catholic Church, to the office, and I asked if I could join their class, and they said yes, and then I went home and decided maybe I should tell my husband about this.
Was it difficult for you, to be able to assume everything that they were teaching you in those classes?
Not really, because every time, being a bit on the intense side, I started praying 15 decades of the Rosary. I started going to daily Mass immediately because these were on the list. I started fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays on bread and water. And I started reading. And every time they brought up a subject in the class, like purgatory, I would go buy a book on purgatory and read it. And when they talked about the Eucharist, well, I went and bought books on the Eucharist, on confession, on the saints. It was a bit much. It's a lot to absorb. Because at the same time, I'm realizing that everybody isn't doing what I'm reading. So it's a bit confusing to not only try to absorb the truths, but also decipher and realize not everybody does it or believes it. Because I kept asking the parish priest, I said, you want me to believe that Jesus is present in the Eucharist, but yet you all don't believe it, because if you believed it, you wouldn't leave him alone. Everybody wouldn't be chatting before and after Mass. I mean, it just, to an outsider, it was very hard to believe that the people believed it.
So what was the solution to this whole problem? Because you were learning a lot, but at the same time, you saw that other Catholics weren't doing this.
It was just more a decision I made when right before, Easter, I went and prayed before Jesus in the church on my knees, and I said, I think this is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my entire life, that you would be, the bread in every Catholic church all over the world waiting for us to come visit you. It's beyond my comprehension, but because I love Our Lady and I want to be Catholic, I'm going to choose to believe it. So I'm going to believe that you're there. And nothing happened, but over the next year, I would say he made it perfectly clear that he's there, and he's more real than you are, if that makes any sense.
So would you say that your love for the Virgin Mary is what brought you to all this?
Yeah, it had me.
From Protestant to...
But I didn't have any bad feelings about Our Lady. I didn't have any negative feelings. I just didn't know her. I knew that she was the Mother of God, and she always came at Christmas and disappeared after Christmas. I never heard anything negative about Our Lady.
So you converted and entered into the Catholic Church. But how was your process of conversion up until this point?
Well, before I started the class, I talked to my husband for the first time about whether he would have any problems if I took this class. And he actually got very angry, and he never gets angry, but he got very angry, and he said, what you mean is you're going to become Catholic, then you're going to want me to be Catholic, then you're going to want our children to be Catholic. And that is never happening. And I was very shocked. I didn't know he had these feelings about the Catholics. And I said, well, that's not fair. And at that point, I said, you don't ever have to become Catholic if I decide to be Catholic. And I can't ask you to raise the children Catholic because that's not what we agreed on when we got married. So I don't think that's going to happen either, so I won't ask that. And he believed me, and because that's what I felt. And so he said he didn't mind if I went and took this class. So I started taking the class, and I started doing everything on the list, going to daily mass. I took the girls to daily mass. I taught them the rosary. I mean, I started to convert. I threw away all the bad books in my house. I quit watching TV. I changed my life. And my husband is watching all of this with amazement because I could never diet for more than a week or exercise for more than a week. So he's watching this obvious change in behavior with amazement. And so on Easter, I asked him if he would come to my entrance. And I said, just to let you know how important it is to me. It's more important than the day we got married or the day your children were born. So I wanted him to know how important it was. And he's such a kind, good man. He said that was okay. He didn't mind coming and bringing the girls. So they all came. But on Mother's Day, I was in the Catholic Church by myself, and I was crying with Our Lady. I said, this is how you must feel. None of your children are here. My children aren't here. My husband isn't here. Here I am on Mother's Day all by myself going to Mass. It was a very sad day. Yeah. But after that, I asked Michael if the girls could become Catholic, because I told him, I said, knowing what I know at this point, I feel like I would go to hell if I didn't teach my children the truth, because that's my job. And I think he thought it was absurd, but he knew I felt that way. He knew I believed that. So he said that they could become Catholic, that I could, but he was never going to become Catholic, never. So that's okay. That's okay, I was happy. So he made it a week before he came to Mass with us every Sunday. So now my children were going to Mass every day and going on Sunday, and my husband. And this is the summer. And then the girls and I did a 54-day Rosary Novena for Michael that summer, that he would have the gift, because it's a gift. I mean, I couldn't give it to him, and they couldn't give it to him, and they knew it was a gift, so we prayed that for him. And then in September, before RCIA started, I asked him if he would go to RCIA and learn what his children were going to believe and learn. And he told me that I couldn't trick him. He wasn't going to be tricked into becoming Catholic. And I said that wasn't my purpose. And so he took the class.
How old were your daughters at the time?
My children were 2, 4, and 6.
And what did your parents and your siblings say?
Well, we didn't all live in the same city, so they're not really observing this time period. They knew that I became Catholic, but they didn't really realize the intensity to which I believed. And they thought it was just a phase I was going through, and that I would probably be out of it in a year or so. Yeah.
How many years have you and your husband been a part of the Catholic Church?
Almost 20 years now.
Okay, in the United States, I understand that there are many married couples in this situation, or one becomes Catholic and the other is Protestant. What would you say to these couples, these married couples that are in this same situation?
I think it's best not to say a whole lot. I didn't do very well at that. I think it's best to pray. So, and not push. Because I tend to push a little bit. And Michael, at one point during the fall, he said, Cynthia, if I do one thing for you, will you leave me alone? And I said, one thing? One thing? He goes, yes, I'll do anything if you'll leave me alone. I said, can I pray about it? And he said, yes. So I prayed about it. I felt like a little kid in a candy store. And so I asked him, I said, will you pray the family rosary with us? He said, will you leave me alone? I said, to the best of my ability, I'll leave you alone. And so he said yes. So I was a little nervous because the family rosary with a 2, 4, and a 6-year-old can never be real holy. So I started out by praying Divine Mercy because that's short. And we did that for about a week, and he said, this is great, Cynthia, but I thought you asked me to do the rosary. I said, okay. So I taught him the rosary, and we did it every night. He did it every night. And then, since he's the disciplined of the two of us, he's more prayerful than I am. He prays much more than I do, and probably I don't know if he still prays all 15 every day, but he did for years. So.
Is that a tradition in your family?
To the best of our ability.
Every night?
Yeah, that's the plan.
And how did your husband convert in the end?
So we took RCIA so he could learn about what his girls were going to learn, promised me, or reassuring me constantly that he was never going to become Catholic. And then a couple weeks before Easter, he told me he was going to become Catholic because when you know of a higher truth, you have to go with it. And that's all he said. And I didn't say anything because I was too happy, but I didn't want to push it. And so he became Catholic the Easter after I did. And that's what we had asked in our 54-day Rosary Novena. We were very specific. We asked that Michael become Catholic the next Easter. And he did. Oh. He did. And then the next Easter, we went on a pilgrimage to Fatima, Lourdes, and Garabandal. It was our first pilgrimage. And during this time frame, after he became Catholic, the Lord was teaching me how to let him be head of the household. And it was just a really amazing.
Our Mother Mary brought you to the Catholic Church. Can you still see her working in your family today?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. She's amazing. I'd do anything for her. Anything in the world for her. Yeah. And I know everybody says the greatest gift is the Eucharist, but the greatest gift to me is Our Lady, because I would never know of Jesus in the Eucharist if it weren't for Our Lady. So she's like the shortcut. If you want to know our Lord, you want to know the Father.
Was there anything in the Catholic Church, in our faith, that was hard for you to accept?
Yes. What was hard for me, and is still kind of hard for me, is all the relics. When they cut up saints and they put them in different churches in Europe, and some of it's corrupt, some of it's incorrupt, and I just personally have trouble with that whole concept. But other than that, not really. I have more trouble with the concept that people don't really want to be holy. They don't really want to know the Lord. I have trouble with that.
Okay, and so when did you realize that you are called to holiness, that your mission was to become a saint?
I think immediately. That's the whole point, because holiness, isn't that getting close to God and knowing Him? And you can't know Him unless you clean up your act. So I would say that was pretty...
Confession. Was it hard for you to accept confession?
The hard part was, since my process was so quick, I didn't really understand everything right away. So as I started learning more and more in the next year, I kept going back to confession because I realized the more that I had done, that was offensive to God. So I kept going back to confession. Oh yeah, I remember this, I remember that. Until finally a priest said, you have to have faith that, the sacrament is real. and quit worrying so much about every little thing that you might have ever done. So I had trouble from that perspective as I realized who I was and what I had done and how offensive. Kind of like I missed the boat. You know, when I became Catholic and started learning, I realized, oh my gosh, I missed the boat. And so it's a process of getting back in that boat.
Have your daughters also accepted the faith?
My daughters were young enough that yes, and they knew that I believed. They knew that I knew that I had missed the boat, and they didn't want to miss the boat. I mean, I think that they were okay with it, totally, especially my oldest daughter. Probably because she was old enough to grasp the concept. She did her first Holy Communion the same year that Michael did. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, the truth is that is really something special. So, when you converted, did the way you educate your daughters change in any way?
Well, I think it was 2 years after I converted, I started homeschooling the girls. It's not something I really wanted to do because it's a lot of work. And I had them in a private school. And I always thought in the back of my mind that I would never have to do that unless my friend pulled her children out of the school, because she really understood all that sort of thing and I wasn't worried about it. In the summer, she came over to my house and told me that she was pulling her children out of the school. I knew I was in trouble. So I started reading about homeschooling and everything. And it's one of the only things in my life that the Lord made perfectly clear to me that I had to do. And I really didn't have a choice. Well, I had a choice, you always have a choice, but I think when things are more difficult, He sometimes makes it clearer so you know what you're supposed to do. And so I decided to homeschool them, and I know why He made it clear, because I probably would have quit after 2 weeks. I know I would have quit after 2 weeks when I realized how difficult it was to be a mother and the teacher. I'm a CPA, I'm an accountant. It's not really how I think. And plus my gauge was Michael. If Michael didn't agree to do it, I would have never done it, but he agreed to do it. So that's pretty amazing in and itself.
Did the fact that you did homeschooling with your daughters help them? Did you really see that it helped them?
It allowed us to practice the faith, because the most important part of the day was getting to Mass and prayer. And that allowed us to do that. And so the schooling and everything else revolved around that. And I think that formed the way they thought, and then they could read and study.
Did your daughters complain about going to daily Mass?
No, they didn't complain. I couldn't really understand the concept. Maybe they were complaining. I know that Sarah, when she was in high school, occasionally when she was really tired, I'd let her stay home and sleep, and she really appreciated the choice of not having to go to Mass. But other than that, there was a time when I was ill, and they would call up the neighbor and have them pick them up to take them to Mass so that they wouldn't miss Mass. So no, I don't think so.
Okay, so what would you say is something that really helps your children to make their faith their own?
The key for children to take on in my opinion, to take on the faith as their own, they have to understand it. You can't just give children rules. Like, you can't go to this movie, you can't do this, you can't do that. You have to teach them how to come to the conclusion themselves. You have to teach them why, so that they're making the decisions. I don't want to go to that movie because it's not good for my soul. I think that is the key, is to teach them why, so that they want to do the things instead of the parents making them do it. For example, teaching them the concept of confession. We all sin. We can't help it. I mean, we're weak, original sin. So we all have to go to confession. You always have to clean the windshield of a car, or you can't see. And once they really understand that concept, then they want to be clean too. And so they want to go to confession. It gets more difficult as you get older than I think than when you're children. They're children, so. And you have to put them in children into situations where they can grow in holiness. Like I tried to get them in summer camps. I tried to get them with other children who were also interested in their faith so that it was normal. And they were able, where we lived, there were lots of children at daily Mass, so they thought it was normal to go to daily Mass.
Thanks for being here with us and changing tracks, Cynthia.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with those who are watching us right now, with those who are following us?
Persevere. It's always worth persevering.
Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. Friends, persevere, persevere. Let the little ones come unto me. This is the truth, short and sweet. The Lord was a really intelligent guy. It's true. In catechism class, with the family, at home, unfortunately, there are families that don't really take it in, that don't persevere, that don't embrace the faith as something personal. And it's true that kids really learn these values and the doctrine that we want them to take on as something their own. Just like Cynthia's 3 girls. It's not enough to say, don't do that because Jesus wouldn't do it. And it's not good enough to say, don't do this or don't do that. Please, set a good example by being at home. You have to be the first one to live the faith. Be real Catholic parents, not just, yes, no, maybe, I accept this part, but I don't like this other part, I don't want to do that. This is not how you set a good example for future Catholics, for these kids who live with us, who are close to us and spend so much time with us every day. Persevere. Be good examples. Remain always in the Lord. Thank you.